All right, everybody. I had quite a fun day on the old Rapid today, trying to stick to no blitz ember. So basically, I've been playing blitz when it really just doesn't matter, and I just want to dick about on the chessboard, saving Rapid for my proper play. So here's today's record so far. Interestingly, I started with two 30-minute games and got my ass kicked in both of them with 77 and then 61 accuracy. So I thought, screw that, that's not brilliant. And that was like really early this morning. So I woke up about like 3 o'clock, finished reading a book, and then I thought I'll do some 10 minutes. So I played 8 10-minute games and I happened to win 6 of them. So my rating has actually come along quite well. So I'm now up to 1547. So no blitz ember so far from December 1st, 1507. So I've got up 40 points. It's not bad. Dipped down to 1487, but since then it's been pretty consistent climb. And then today, yeah, I've gone up just a little bit. So feeling quite good. So what I've got for you for today's video, because it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, just thought I'd give you a gift of 6 of the best. Just a handful, so, a few games that I played today, 1 or 2 from other people maybe. But let's just go through and have some fun. And I've got my cup of coffee, got my new top as well that the missus got me. It's proper England rugby top. This is great. Okay, so let's start. So I don't know which order these are in. It's just all for fun, but they should all be riotous, good fun. We should have some good attacks and 1 or 2 complete cock-ups. So, what's not to like? Let's go. So, game number 1 is Tom Kavua from, where's that, Vietnam? Vietnam, rated 1547. And we have a Scandi, and I do this, and he does this. So, now that I'm, fairly solidly above 1500 at the moment, I'm finding my opponents have a bit of a better idea. So if you're an E4 player, right, and your opponent plays the Scandinavian, this is the correct response. E takes D5 is best, and if they play the modern, so normally, Queen takes D5 is the main line, but if they play the modern variation with Knight F6, this is the best move. Developing either knight is also okay, that's fine. You don't want to push C4 and try and defend the pawn, because you get into Icelandic gambit territory, and I tend to do quite well there. And also I've seen people develop the bishop to defend the pawn as well, but generally forget about the pawn. That pawn isn't long for this world. Control the center, play D4, okay? So now I'm playing the Kadash gambit against this, and this is something that 1500 players tend not to be prepared for. So this one goes, I have to say, quite well. So this is the first step of it, right? You offer a pawn on c6, and white's thinking, right, I've played this pawn to here, I've played it to here with a capture. I wasn't even trying to hold on to this pawn. Free stuff, why not? Take the pawn, okay? They take the pawn. Now, the most natural move here would be b takes. Knight takes c6. But we don't even do that in the Kadash gambit. We play e5, right? And the computer says I'm a complete dumbass. It's gone from 3, now settling at 2.6. It's saying, you're a complete moron, you deserve to lose. Okay, well let's see, shall we? So you're offering white another free pawn, and white's going, this is too easy. I'm now 3 pawns up, I can't lose. Okay, well, now what we do is we trade queens. So white's been forced to move his king. That means white can't castle, which means this rook's going to struggle, and this rook's going to struggle to get out into the game. Also, look at white's development, or lack of. Nothing. He's got nothing, right? He's got 2 pawns way out behind enemy lines, and all his junk is still on the back row. Okay, I've got 1 knight out in the board, right? But more, and also I can castle, he can't. Now you play knight g4. So we're attacking this pawn, which would come with a fork on the king and the rook, and there's only really 2 options here. Well, I guess there's 3. Could bring the bishop out as well. but then you could take the bishop double up pawn, so that's not a very good one. So it's really king e1, in which case you take this pawn and bring this knight into one of these squares and try and do the same thing to him on the other side of the board. Haha! Or there's this move, knight h3. And that's okay, but you see I've got the evaluation bar set on these games, right? It now fancies black, right? Although I'm 3 pawns down, it's like, no, this is not great, okay? So what we do now is grab the pawn, okay? And we've now got 2 knights out on the board, and white's got a bad knight. White now tries to kick my knight away with f3, and I'm like, fine, I'll have another pawn. Thank you very much. Your lead is now down to 1 pawn. Your king has moved. Your rooks are going to struggle to get out in the game. You've got a rubbish knight on the edge of the board, and you're behind in development. I call that compensation. So he brings out his bishop to attack my knight. Computer hates it. Okay. Yeah, it's pinning the knight. What I do now is I grab the knight. Okay. With my bishop. Now, the analysis said actually a better move order is to take this pawn now, and then if the pawn takes, I take the knight. Because the pattern is this pawn is the only defender of this pawn, and it's the only defender of this knight. Okay, so this is why what I'm doing with my goldfish method at the moment is I'm drawing an arrow for, I'm not doing every defensive relationship, but I'm saying, I'm highlighting things that are not defended, okay, and then looking for things that are only defended once. Now each of these pawns here, for example, is only defended once. Okay, that one by the rook, that one by the bishop, that one by the king. Okay, this pawn is undefended, and this knight is defended only by that, and that is defended only by that. So when you see one piece that is the only defender of 2 things, you can go, haha. Okay, so the computer thought I should take that, and then if pawn takes, you know, so I've won a pawn anyway, but it's the same difference here. I could have just grabbed the pawn there, but I decided to castle, put my rook straight on d8, put my opponent in check. He plays his bishop to here to break the check. I can always grab that. I do grab that. Then he captures my pawn on c6, and then he resigns, which is interesting. Because this bishop is defended twice, okay, but I mean I can capture this bishop, right, and then material is equal. However, he's got a rook stuck there. See, this bishop can't move because it's pinned. This knight can't move because it's the second defender of that bishop, right? So if this knight were to move here or here, I can just grab the bishop or grab it with a knight and then discover check, yeah? So not good. Anyway, my opponent resigns. So all good stuff. Now this one isn't mine. This one was submitted today by Keld. And it's an interesting approach to the Karo Khan. So I've been playing the fantasy variation. So we have e4, c6, d4, d5, the Karo Khan, starting position. So I've been playing this fantasy variation with f3, which is interesting. Keld's approach is exchange, and then the pan-off attack. Now, so he's in the 1100 to 1200 range, as is the opponent here. This is an interesting attack. So this is like the Queen's Gambit, but the e-pawn here and black's c-pawn have vanished. Okay, so there's no option to play this one, which is, what is that? What do we call that? Well, we can't play it anyway. Is that the Slav? Or this is that's Queen's Gambit does declined. That I think is the Slav, something like that. Anyway, so here, black develops the bishop. That seems very sensible. White develops a knight, and now we have, I noticed, 2 attackers on this pawn. Right, that has to be in your checklist. Counting attackers and defenders all the time. So black develops the knight to defend the pawn. Pawn is now defended by the knight and the queen, and now a 3rd attacker. So this queen is now piling up on this pawn as attacker number 3. It's only defended twice, but the queen is also attacking this pawn here. So, interesting. Okay, queen d7. And we've now got 2 defenders on here and a defender on here. But remember, this one is attacked actually 3 times. So I don't know if there's a way that Black could have resolved this situation, really. Quite honestly. Interesting one. Anyway, Queen goes there, take the pawn, and instead of recapturing, Black pushes e6, which is interesting. This is definitely a wide open game, and then boom, right? Out comes the bishop. Queen and king are on the same diagonal. There's only one way to stop it, which is to block with a knight. Pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, and then the bishop just drops back here. Now the rook goes to there for some reason, and again Black resigns. So we've had 2 games where a player makes a move and then instantly resigns. So obviously here the rook's just hanging and is going to fall, and that's it. So game over on that one. But yeah, interesting, that panel of attack. Might have to look into that. I'm doing all right with the fantasy variation at the minute, but the panel of attack looks good. Okay, here's another one. This is a 10-minute rapid, probably from today. And we're in Vienna territory. Okay, now, this is the semi-copycat. Now, here, if this bishop comes out, then you play Queen g4. If this knight comes out, then what I'm doing at the moment is f4. So it's a bit like the Vienna gambit. But it all goes quite horribly wrong. Now, my opponent now plays d5, which is dubious because, again, if you count attackers and defenders, right? I've got 3 attackers, only 2 defenders, so I take. And the knight now comes here. Okay, so now he's got 1, 2, 3 attackers on that pawn, and I've only got 2 defenders. So, I mean, I could defend again with the queen, for example, but I'd just decide to grab this pawn and attack the knight. So, knight takes d5, and now I lose. I blunder the game. I throw it all away. I'm doing all right. I'm up a pawn at this point in time. Okay, got 2 attackers on this knight, 2 defenders. So when there are the same number of attackers and defenders, there is no advantage to be gained by initiating the exchange, right, as the attacker. So now, one thing that we have to remember, if you're a Vienna gambit player or any kind of opening that involves the disappearance of Freddy, what do we always say? That's right, you have to play knight to f3. We have to play knight to f3 to cover that square from this cow. Okay, now I forgot all about that because I was terribly excited that I was winning a nice game and I grabbed the knight. Big mistake. It's not because, you know, he's going to recapture. Not at all. Nothing of the sort. Queen h4 check. Oh no. Right? Now I have to play g3 or move my king. Okay? Now if I'd moved my king here or here, Black has queen takes bishop with check. And then on the next move, queen takes knight. And I've lost, you know, suddenly I'm a piece down. Right? So I hit there. Queen comes here with check. Right? We know this pattern. I should know this. Right? I've used 1.5 minutes of my time. Dumbass. Okay, there. Now he's just toying with me now. Right? And I resign. I think, screw this. I'm going to lose my knight. I'll very likely lose my rook as well. It's all gone Pete Tong. But learning an important lesson. It's not a failure if you take the lesson from it. So there you go. Well, my lesson is, if Freddy gone, knight f3. Right? I mean, if you watch my videos, you know that I know that. I did know it, I just didn't look at that corner. I just didn't look at the board. All I was thinking about was what was going on in the middle of the board. Oh yeah, I can take that because I'm, you know, up a pawn. Yay. Right? I forgot to look over my shoulder. Right? Like we had in Your King is Hanging yesterday. You know, that the first game of his, he was so concerned with how he was going to win, he forgot not to lose. It's exactly the same here. Oh wow, so I get tick of the day for that one. Okay, now another 1500, another 10-minute rapid. I have the black pieces, and we have d4, and this is what I'm playing at the moment, d4, knight f6. And then if they go London style, which is very, very dull, I'm doing c5. And this is one of those things where I'm not that much of a fan of using the analysis board to analyze positions or to improve my opening theory. The analysis board is good, but you have to remember that this is the computer thinking here, and they don't think like we think. So the analysis board will tell you what the best move is in any position. All right. So for example, I think if we run the analysis board, it will probably say that d5 is the best move, okay? But I like this because it screws with humans' brains. So the computer's recommendation for what is the best move in a particular position is based on the assumption that both players are computers, and that your opponent is going to play like a computer, and your opponent is going to play accurate moves, right? But that's not the real world unless you are playing computers, right? Which is boring. So what I've been doing more recently is going over to Lichess and the opening explorer in Lichess and looking at what 1600 players do. So I filter it down to 1600 players, okay? So let me show you, right? I'll pull up a browser, new window, okay? So you go to Lichess, you go to opening explorer, right? And slightly annoying that it takes 3 clicks to flip the board. But anyway, so this is the position, okay? And then my opponent signals the London. Now, so what I've got, if I go back to this, no, not that. Go back to these settings, I think. Okay, so now I'm looking at average rating 1600 because that's where I'm aiming now, right? I want to get to 1600. I'm not really too concerned about what do I need to do to beat 1800s and 2000s, right? That comes later. I'm not too worried about that. So I want to see what 1600s do, okay? So now, the analysis board would tell me one thing. So now g6 is common, but this is the normal kind of King's Indian defense kind of setup, right? That's fine. d5 is good with a 50% win rate for white. And there's also e6, which is kind of quiet, right? Like Philidor, isn't it, that? And then d6 is the next most popular one. But then look, c5. And c5 actually has a better win rate than all of those 4 more popular ones, right? So I'm looking, c5 has a 53% win rate for black. So that's better for black. And based on what humans do, that's the way to go. Anyway, back to the game. Switch game of wheel. Here we go. All right, so now, my opponent now plays the very boring e3. Okay, so he's obviously just going London, right? I'm going to put my bishop here, I'm going to put my knight here, I might play my knight there, and try to get my knight in there, and it's seen it 1,000 times. So, Queen b6. Now, what's interesting about this is, and this is a weakness in the London, right? Now, Laughing Boy here has moved his dark squared bishop outside of his dark squared pawn pyramid and is busily setting about cementing up and bricking up that pyramid, right? Only problem is this bishop now can no longer defend this pawn, okay? So the moment that you develop a bishop, you are undefending, usually, either your b pawn or your g pawn. Okay, so queen out here attacks this pawn. And there's not a lot of ways to defend. My opponent, for some reason, decides to play knight a3. Which is interesting, because I just grabbed a pawn. Now he plays knight to here, and now we see his plan. Right. So clearly, his plan is knight c7, fork, king and rook, right? That's not rocket science. Now, I could play d6 and block the bishop. That doesn't help, because the knight still gets in there. But if the knight does get in and then deletes my rook, I could play my king here and the knight is technically trapped. So now I play queen to b4, which I don't think is the most accurate move. Because my opponent just plays c3 now and kicks my queen. I can't capture the knight because it's defended by this bishop here. So I come in now, and now I'm thinking if the knight does come in here, maybe I can grab this pawn with check. Okay, knight does come in with check. I have to move to d8, it's the only move. He grabs the rook, I grab the pawn. Now, white is doing better, clearly. White has lost, what, 2 pawns, and I've lost a whole rook. However, I have the initiative. Now, white is now in check, not good, right? And the queen can't block because it undefends this rook. So I get my rook back, okay? So the king is going to have to go walkabout. And of course, this bishop can't help because he's bricked it up outside of his own pawn chain. So the king has to go walkies, right? Now check here. And again, queen he can't block because again, I grab the rook. So now the king goes to f3 and out comes the king, right? So now d6, and it looks as though I'm kind of trying to win the knight by trapping it in the corner, but in fact there's another purpose to that move, which is to do with this guy, and I want to play this with check and win the queen, right? So this is super aggressive stuff. Now he attacks my queen and I go too late, right? I'm putting you in check. I could simply actually have just grabbed this pawn, right? I didn't want. I can't take the rook because then his queen moves to capture my queen, and I've lost my advantage. So now I put him in check, and his king has to move, and the king can't go here because of bishop and queen. Can't go here because of knight, right? There's only one legal move, so he has to go here, right? Now my queen's still under attack. So what do? Just move my queen here, grab the pawn, right? He attacks my bishop. Queen comes in here to add a second defender to the bishop, right? Now the bishop's actually attacked 3 times. So he could do bishop takes, if knight takes, queen takes, queen takes, king takes. That would kind of make sense. But instead of that, he captures a pawn here. So he's thinking about rook takes this, and then I've got to come here. I know, rook comes. I don't think it's good. It's not really a convincing attack. Anyway, he doesn't get time to do that because I now have a winning sequence. Okay, I'm behind in material. I'm down a rook for a couple of pawns, but it doesn't matter. If you can checkmate your opponent, don't matter. Knight e4 check. Okay, he's in check. Can't stay there. Can't go there. Can't go there. Right? You cannot block a knight check. And if the knight can't be captured, the king's got to move. There's only one square. h4. Queen f6 check. Okay, now that does undefend the bishop, has to be said. Right, but here, bishop blocks, captures, and that's checkmate. Okay, if the king had captured the bishop, what would happen there? I've got h5 check. He can't go here, 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 here. So he's got to go here or here. Let's say he goes there. I've got another check here with a knight. King has to go there. I don't know. That. King has to go here. Whew. It's all looking a little bit desperate, isn't it? So I don't know. Queen there. But, you know, the king is pretty much stuck over here. But that's definitely one that you'd need to sit and calculate. But there, my opponent here completely just rushed his move. Totally rushed it. But yeah, very satisfying win, that one. Okay, here's another. Okay, so here I've got the black pieces again, and we have a Scandinavian. And here, he doesn't take the pawn. Now, you probably should take the pawn. And this is interesting now, because what we have now is something that's close to the French advanced variation. I've played quite a bit of French, Okay, so I now play c5, which is the correct move here. Previously, I've played my bishop out here, which is great. But I'm planning to do that anyway. So white plays bishop e2, and now I bring my bishop out. So this is now like a French. So I'm in known territory here, but big advantage, my bishop is free, right? This French bishop. So we have bishop to here, and I'm thinking, yeah, the bar doesn't like it. I'm thinking, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm going to trade the bishop off. Double your pawns. Now this does give him a kind of a central pawn majority, but at the same time it's kind of ugly. So now I play e6, and I have a very familiar pawn structure, and I know the ideas here. Okay, so he brings out his knight, preparing to castle. I bring out my knight, castles, knight out here. Now the idea here is my knight's going to come to here, put a second attacker on the e5 pawn, right? He develops a knight, knight g6, and it really likes black at this point. It's actually got me +3, right? Plus 3.2, and material is equal. Okay, we've lost the bishop each, that's it. So he now plays his rook out to e1 to add a second defender to this. Okay, I play my queen to c7, third attacker. Right, probably not the best move according to the bar. Now white plays his queen out here, okay, pinning my knight, so now I can't enter into that exchange of material. So I play a6, and simply I'm preparing b5 and push that queen backwards and gain a load of space on the queen side. So he plays a pawn forwards, doesn't matter. Now the computer hates this. Now it says white's better, a bit better. Okay, but I hit the queen. Oh, that's why. Okay, so poor move on my part. What I didn't realise is this rook is undefended. That means this pawn is pinned. That means that this pawn is not defending that pawn. And he's got two attackers on it, and it's got actually no defenders. Therefore, I've just hung a pawn, right? By putting it here, it's hung. It looks like it's defended, but it ain't. Okay, so that was a mistake. Okay, now I move my queen up here. Maybe thinking about 1, 2, 3 attackers. Is on this pawn, he's actually got 3 defenders. Knight comes in with check, so I trade off, and then I castle. All right, and now it's fancying white. It says white's doing better. Queen here. Now black's doing better, but why? We trade. Black's still doing better. Okay, cool. So now white has a very awkward pawn there. He's actually got the tripled up pawns on the d file, doubled up and isolated pawns on the b file, right? And these pawns are going to be hard to defend, as we shall see. So now I grab one of those pawns. He takes, I take. Okay, and now I've got quite a solid chunk of 6 pawns here and a singleton. He's got 2 isolated, and a trio around his king, same as me. Okay, he's got a bishop, I've got a knight. So we'll move a little bit quicker the rest of this. So he defends his pawn, I come up attacking that pawn, he brings the bishop out, I grab the pawn. Okay, so I'm a pawn up. Bishop here, right, rook comes to one side, it's absolutely fine. So I've got ideas, I can come in here, attack this, but I've got the open file, that's important. So he pushes the pawn forward, I attack the bishop, defends. I offer a trade of minor pieces, he goes yes, I go thank you very much. Because I'm quite happy. But for the simple reason I've got better pawns, right? I've got all these guys with the king on their side can defend each other quite well, right? Rook's defending that right now, and he's going to have trouble with all these isolated pawns that can't defend each other. That means his pieces are going to be overworked trying to defend all his pawns. Okay, so we have some pushy push. Okay, I double up my rooks. There's no way now that he can defend that as well. So he just pushes his rook up. Now here I could have grabbed a pawn, he gets a pawn, I get another pawn, maybe we trade rooks, you know. But I decided to bring my king up instead. He shuts the door by putting these pawns all like this. So this really, you know, does prevent my king from making any forward progress up there, unless I use my pawns to break through. Okay, trade, rook onto the open file again. Okay, now it's got me plus 4.3. Okay, even though I'm only 1 pawn up. Rook here, do we trade? No. Because here's what I'm thinking, right? I could have, for example, put my rook here. And then he might take me, and then my king recaptures. But then that leaves my king on this square. What I figure is, if I put my rook here, and he decides to trade rooks, I capture forwards. And that moves my king further up the board, right? And that's what happens. He grabs my rook, my king moves forwards. His king moves forwards. I take the opposition. So now his king cannot progress, and I'm going to win this pawn. He moves a pawn, I win that. He moves a king, I win that one. Okay? Check. And here actually my opponent does have a little bit of a stab at some counterplay. I play this. He pushes a pawn forwards, right? And what I failed to do here is I just didn't look at all the board. I grabbed that pawn with my rook. I thought he was going to grab this and then come after this, but he didn't. He grabbed this, I grabbed that, he gets that one. Okay? But it's not gonna matter. Because now again my king is moving up towards the centre of the board. Now my king is harassing his rook. Now he can't check me because of the pawn. Right? So he's going to have to abandon the defence of that pawn. So I grabbed that pawn. He could have grabbed my A pawn just fine. But this was a losing move really. Because now what's my next move? Rook d4. Simple fork with check. He has to trade rooks. And now it's the end. Right, king here. I push a pawn up. He's in check. He's not going to be able to stop Andy and Gary with one king. Just doesn't work like that. Okay. So now I push Eddie, and he goes, "You got me." Okay. There you go. One more for the road. Okay. Again, we have the black pieces. So, the Nimzovich-Larsen attack. What the hey? What is this? E5. So I'm figuring with this first move, he's planning on putting his bishop here. So I probably want to have pawns on dark squares to prevent that bishop from coming all the way through here and capturing my rook at any point in time. So out comes the bishop. Okay, I bring out my knight to defend the pawn because the king's pawn's undefended. Okay, he plays e4, which the computer doesn't like very much. I develop my bishop now. So now I'm thinking about a kind of, maybe a kind of London-y setup with a pyramid here, but in front of my king rather than in front of my queen. So anyway, bishop out here into the Italian position, looking at f2. What's not to like? Knight comes out, d6, bishop comes out, and I'm thinking, what's he planning? Does he want to come here? Well, the queen's kind of guarding that square. But I push f6 anyway. Okay, computer doesn't like that. He castles. I bring out my bishop, pinning his knight. He attacks the bishop. Okay, I step backwards. Right? He double kicks. I come back again. Right? And you can see now he's opened up space around the king. So now he grabs my knight. I recapture with a rook. I'm happy to do that because it, apart from anything else, puts my rook in line with his king. Okay, pushes d3, and now I decide let's bust through. Okay, and the computer likes that a lot. h5. Okay, he decides not to capture with a pawn, and instead comes after my bishop. Not a problem, just drop back. He takes. Computer doesn't like that. Okay, push my queen forward. So obviously now my queen is now looking at this pawn here, and then maybe this knight. Okay, knight now comes in, blocking the progress of the queen. Okay, so is it time to castle? No. I push g6, attacking this pawn and this knight. So either he's going to have to capture or he's going to have to move the knight away. He captures. I take back with a rook. Okay, now taking with the bishop would have been just as good, because then I'm threatening the knight, and then pretty much whatever the knight does, I could probably take this pawn with a discovered check, right? So very often it makes sense to capture with the piece that doesn't give check immediately, because it gives you the discovery. And the computer rated me down slightly for taking with a rook there. It still got me plus 3.6. All right, king moves out of check, and now I castle, because now I want to bring both rooks into the game. I've got, you know, 2 rooks, queen, maybe a bishop, maybe even a knight. Use all my stuff now pointed at my opponent. I'm a pawn down, doesn't matter a toss. Okay, now bishop e6, looking at this knight, but really looking at the pawn behind it. Queen comes out. My knight now comes in, and it doesn't like this move at all. It says it's now completely equal. Okay, but I'm thinking, I'm attacking this knight, I'm attacking the queen, I'm attacking this rook, sorry, that pawn there. Knight takes, and the computer goes, no, 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 no. That was not the right thing to do, my love. Okay, so now I capture with the d pawn, the e pawn, e takes d4. And now I'm winning again. And he brings his knight in here. And I don't see the point of that at all. At all. There's no real threat. Rook h8. And just look at this now, you know, I've got space all around here. And that's because he, you know, threw his pawns out to try and kick me away with this and then this. Okay, my bishop's just come around here. So this bishop that he's kicked away has just quietly dodged out of here and is now threatening to play a part in the attack again. Plays rook there, doesn't matter. Rook g to h6. King comes here, and now it says mate in 9. Okay, so bishop takes there. This is like a dovetail, right? Because he can't retreat. Okay, so there's only one move. He has to put king here. Now it says mate in 7. Rook g8, check. King has to go here. And now it's mate in 6. Rook h4. So I'm finding the right checks anyway. And here my opponent just resigns. So there you go. Lots and lots of fun to be had on the chessboard today. Really enjoyed myself. Hope you've enjoyed looking at these games. Yeah, it's all good stuff. Thanks for watching. See you soon.